TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
On this week's show, I'm joined by factual content expert Hannah Demidowicz and Gerrit Kemming, Managing Director of distributor channel owner Quintus Studios, as we look at the future of factual TV, new content funding models, what buyers are looking for, and whether commissioning is the future of distribution. Plus, they tell us their heroes of the week and who or what they're telling to get in the bin. And I warn you, Hannah's is controversial. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. On this week's show, we're looking at the future of factual TV, and in particular, the funding and distribution of this burgeoning content genre and the new models that are setting the course for the future of factual production. My first guest this week is Gerrit Kemming, Managing Director of Quintus Studios, the Berlin-based international distribution business and channel owner. Welcome to the show, Gerrit.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Hello.
Guten Nachmittag to you.
That is, so we do this whole thing in German then. That's good. I like it.
Yeah, there we go. That's as far as it goes, really, for me. It's brilliant to have you on. I've only just come across Quintus, but I think you've got a really interesting background and, more importantly, a rather innovative business model for the production and distribution of factual content. And we'll get into that in a little while. But first of all, tell us a bit about your background and the history of Quintus.
Yeah, thanks first of all that you find us interesting. So do we actually. Quintus started. I started Quintus about 11 years ago, in 2010, and I started as a, let's say, classical content distribution agency. So back then, I started more as a representative for existing catalogs or existing slides for international producers and distributors and help them to raise their sales in specific markets or maybe just for specific rights or specific platforms. That's what we started with. And then a couple of years later, I think that was in 2013, we started to get into closer cooperation with producers, some of which were especially from Germany. So we realized there are producers in Germany and in other places who were able to produce for the international market in terms of quality and in terms of storytelling, because there is a difference between a German, like a classical German story, how to tell it, and an international one. But there were companies that were able to do that, and but they were still always producing in a total buyout way for the German market and its broadcasters. And we started to go into cooperation with them at a very early stage when we helped them to develop content. So they always came in with their production expertise, and we came in as the sales guys, knowing what's hot, what's not, where in the world, and then help them to twist their story into, to make it a more appealing story for the international market. Then we even started to raise funding for them by, finding pre-sale partners, which was quite new in 2013 when we started it. And then probably the next turning point for the company. So we did this pre-sale model and the sales for 2-3 more years, which was quite successful. And then the next turning point for Quintus was actually that we started to load up our titles that we had in the catalog onto YouTube back then, only in those territories, obviously, where we didn't have any linear sales attached. And that ran very side business like for 1 or 2 years before we suddenly realized that, something is happening there and something is growing and the numbers are slightly growing. And that was actually our start for taking a deeper look into it. And then we started actually to put a whole team on it, a team of algorithm experts, of channel managers, of people who are able to create all the metadata and thumbnails and that kind of thing. And then we started to actually buy content and license content for these channels. And a couple of years later, we have several channels actually, but one of the biggest in the documentary space on YouTube at all. And now, the next step is growing this into more channels, onto other platforms, and that's where we are right now. So, a mixture of distribution and channel operator and channel owner.
Well, actually, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, you've come from the having a successful linear distribution business, but actually, as the digital revolution has come into the TV industry, you've obviously adapted to that and followed the same curve, obviously, as other businesses, but also a lot of media businesses in the States. So your main channel is Free Documentary.
That's right.
So tell us about Free Documentary. What sort of size of audience have you got, the demographics, location of viewers, and what kind of content do you feature?
Free Documentary is kind of a broad documentary channel. So it's quite similar to, let's say, Quest, so Discovery Quest, or in Germany, Welt, or RMC Découverte in France. So in terms of the content that works on Free Documentary. And so we just hit the 3 million subscriber threshold or mark, which is actually quite amazing for us, and we're growing at a rate of over 100,000 subscribers per month actually. So that's rapidly growing. The audience probably also quite similar to the channels that I just mentioned. We are a little bit male skewed audience from, let's say, 22 to 55, with a focus on 30 to 45. The biggest audience actually comes from the US. We are rarely worldwide in our channels. That is mainly due to the possibility of actually getting access to rights, because if you want to have worldwide rights, it's obviously always more difficult if you just picking specific territories. And so our footprint is actually mainly the US, or the English-speaking world, the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and then some other territories, which are Benelux, Scandinavia, and actually India and Philippines, which is more an algorithm or strategic aspect to it than really the audience that's in these territories. So that's a deep dive topic actually to go through.
We should think of you as like a Quest, an international Quest with a similar sort of audience, similar sort of content. And to be clear, this is all long form factual content, not short form.
No, that's correct. Completely long form content. That's correct.
Well, I think one of the really interesting things that I saw last week, actually, regarding YouTube as a factual channel, Robert Kinkle, who's YouTube's chief business officer, he was speaking at the RTS event in Cambridge, and he declared YouTube a fully diversified platform after starting with grainy home videos and the like. And now, and this is his quote, it says, media companies represent about 25% of YouTube watch time globally. Another 25% is music, and 50% is YouTube creators. So actually, if you think about, obviously, YouTube is the world's second biggest search engine after Google. Advertising revenues are neck and neck with Netflix when it comes to their SVOD revenues. YouTube's revenues are reported at $7 billion for the second quarter, and that's up 83% from a year ago. So it's growing massively, and more media companies are working with YouTube. So long-form factual content is really coming of age on that platform from a revenue perspective. Now, from being a linear distribution business, tell us what you've learned. Being a channel owner now and a distributor, that must give you touched on it earlier, so much data, which lots of other platforms don't give you, or don't give producers anyway, in terms of watch time and all of these other analytics that you have access to on your dashboard. That must be crucial intelligence in terms of what content you're looking to put on the channel and looking to acquire and fund. So tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, a lot of things that you were just mentioning.
The most amazing thing about the 7 billion that you were just mentioning per quarter is that I said that our channel is quite big. So 95% of that 7 billion is actually coming to Quintus in the end. So that's our coverage. No, just kidding.
Right.
I wish it was.
Good.
Data is indeed a big thing for us because it makes the choice for the content obviously a lot easier. I mean, broadcasters had data on their ratings and on their audience as well, but it's such a handy thing. So on my mobile there is our Google or actually YouTube Analytics, and you can see in live how many views a certain title makes at this moment or has made yesterday, or what the revenues were yesterday. And so very, very detailed data that you can access. So on the one hand, that gives you obviously a good fundamental basis for the choice for new content that you want to put on. And on the other hand, it gives you many tools actually to work on even while a title is on that. There's different KPIs that need to be in a good performance for a title to actually be taken on by the algorithm. It's, it would be too much to talk about all the different data, but it's, whenever we publish a title, we analyze it straight away and see how well it performs in terms of click-through rate, in terms of how many impressions, how much it's going to be sent out. And there are ways how you can try to influence these KPIs, which is not like it's cheating on anything. It's just like you realize straight away if the audience, your target audience, likes what you present or not. If there are ways how you could maybe twist the, how you present whatever the audience likes in the end or not. So that's obviously a great tool that YouTube is giving out to their content partners that they can work on to really make something amazing for the audience. And that helps us a lot. And especially when we're now coming to our first Quintus originals, how we call them. So productions that we're developing purely for our own channel. This is a helpful tool to be based on all the data.
It's a virtuous circle, isn't it? You can see what the audience is enjoying, what it's consuming, what it doesn't like, and test and learn. And that's something that we've really had a number of discussions with producers and digital experts in TellyCast in the past, is, how important this test and learn process is. Coming to talk about your originals in a second. You've just hired former Zigzag, Woodcut and Discovery exec Adam Jacobs to lead your content strategy and your original strategy. Tell us about that. Tell us how you came across Adam and what Adam is bringing to Quintus going forward.
Well, first of all, he's a really great guy. We were actually introduced to each other by a shared friend, because I was looking for exactly that type of guy who, knows about successful shows and what makes a show successful in this area. When we're talking about the channels that I was mentioning before, the Quest or Discovery in general, and the Welt or RMC, these type of channels, because that was the type of channels where we share the target groups with. Then the other quality that this guy that I was looking for, or actually, of course, the lady that I was looking for would actually need to bring in, was a understanding of how a digital audience acts as opposed to the linear audience, and how much more flexible we as a channel would need to be. That is, on the one hand, in regards to how we present the title, but also in terms of storytelling and other things about the structure of a documentary. And Adam seemed to me as a perfect fit, and actually with all his network and his knowledge about good storytelling, he proved to be the perfect fit. And it's in these 5 months that Adam is actually working for us, we made such a huge step towards what we have as a vision where we want to go to as Quintus, and that's also thanks to him.
Just before we talk about your business model, how you're funding original content for your YouTube channel. Just so I understand, so if you're making long form content for YouTube, we know about short form content that you have to get certain beats right in the first 10 seconds, less, 4 seconds, maybe even on TikTok it's a lot less than that. When it comes to long form, the way that you format a half-hour episode, let's say, is that different to what you would see on Quest, a half-hour show on Quest?
First of all, most of our shows are even 48 to 52 minutes, so even the half hours are rarely in there. It's kind of a mixture between, I would say, the YouTube that we all know about. It needs to hit from the first second on, but then it also needs to work over a big amount of minutes for the audience. We don't really edit a lot when it comes to new stuff that we put on the channel. So it works in the long term. It works as the documentary on Quest, for example.
Right.
It still needs to hit in the first seconds, which is partly done through our free documentary intro that we put in front of all our documentaries. But then also, the audience that we have, the 3 million fans or subscribers that we have, they know about the style, and it differs a bit from a TikTok video, right? But in the end, the average watch time of a documentary that we have on YouTube is over 18 minutes, which is, most of the stuff on YouTube is not even 18 minutes long. So, and that's our average per piece watch time. Even if it's not the first second, hits, boom, bang thing that is on there, it still works because of the audience that we're targeting, because of, the television screen being the screen that is growing the biggest for YouTube. So a lot of our viewers actually watch our stuff on the TV screen that they have in their living room. So on the one hand, it's a very digital experience. On the other hand, for the target group, it might not differ that much from switching on Welt or Discovery and switching on to free documentary. By the way, I'm not, who am I that I compare myself always to Discovery? Discovery is such a great brand, so I don't want to come across as someone who sees himself too big. Not at all.
Well,
we're very small compared to that one. But I just wanted to so that your audience knows what kind of content we're talking about.
Well, let's face it, they've only just got into streaming. You've been in streaming for a long time. So actually, the way that this market is being disrupted at the moment, 2-3 years is a very long time. Obviously, YouTube is your main platform and you've been very successful there. Do you have plans to take free documentary onto other platforms like smart TVs and the other platforms that are available for AVOD channels?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, there is for us two obvious ways how we can and want and will grow. The one is, offering more and more channels. And I mentioned at the beginning that free documentary is our biggest and longest existing channel, but we have now 6 different channels in different genres. So there's nature, there's history, and some others. So that's the one thing how we could grow. And the other way to grow is obviously getting onto other platforms, and where this is on the one hand a plan, but we're already working on it. So we are on Facebook Watch. We have just done our first projects together with Snap, actually very successful. We are on Roku. We have some CTV apps on smart TVs. But this is growing and growing. We're now going into the OTT space more and more. So absolutely, that's the way to go for us. That we have as many, I would say, outlets as possible.
You mentioned you're looking to commission some originals and to partner with producers, presumably on originals. Tell us about your business model, how it works, and how producers might work with you.
The key to the Quintus Originals is that we not only have our growing channels, but that we have a second really strong power, which is the distribution department headed up by Anouk van Dijk, former Off the Fence sales exec. And she's doing
an amazing job in, selling our catalog. So we have actually, there is two powers coming together. The one is our channels. The other one is the potential of license revenues that we can generate through our global sales, right?
Yeah.
And then, knowing this, the distribution business and how channels work, how the license business works, how the co-production business works, for over 15 years now. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we needed, let's say, 3 pre-sale partners on board for a project to be able to greenlight a production. And we were not even at break-even point back then, but more, reduced the gap that we filled ourselves. So actually the producer did it and made it to a gap which was in a manageable area, right? So where we know, okay, how much money do we need to make through sales later on so that we get into profit. And whenever we thought that was manageable, we started the production. And getting 3 pre-sale partners on board is getting more and more difficult. So because of channels closing, budgets getting down. So I'm talking about linear channels. So this process of getting 3 or 4 partners on board as pre-sale partners is getting more and more difficult and taking longer and longer. So we analyzed this whole process, analyzed the potential of revenues coming from license in the different genres, and then analyzed the potential on the international market and analyzed what's working on our channels very well. There is quite a big overlap of content that has a high potential, high demand on the international linear broadcasting market, also on the international digital market, and working on our channels, or especially free documentary, and is then again producible in a quite cost-efficient way. And whenever we define these titles, there is amazing producers out there who are willing to get into a real cooperation. That's what we found now in our first discussions about our model. And what we do is when we define such a potential project, we want to cover most of the hard, I always call this hard costs. I don't even know if you say this in English, but like the proper cost, off-account cost that a producer has. So we don't want him to get into the big risk. That's up to us to go into the big risk. But what we want the producer, and that's our offer to the producer world, is actually that postpone their profits to the success of the production later on. Because what we say is we cover most of your hard costs. And you might not make a profit right now, but the upside is we give you a share of all income that we make, which is on our channels, which is also on global sales, and you get this share over the lifetime of this project that we're cooperating on, and hopefully the upside is way bigger than the profit that you make if you just make a commission or total buyout production. So that's the model that we're offering to the indie production world. And actually, the first discussions that we're having are very, very interesting. It looks like that there are many producers out there who are absolutely willing to do this and to try this out. And I think in the end, hopefully, it makes sense for everyone financially, getting projects off the ground, and in all these regards, it's an amazing time actually for us to discover.
That markup on production that a producer traditionally makes for when it's a domestic commission or commission to a regular linear channel, they have to essentially forget that and almost invest that into the revenue share. So actually, the revenue that they may get from this project could be much, much greater than that 20% markup or whatever that figure is. So it's about really approaching this as a partnership approach, a revenue share, rather than actually just getting a show as a regular linear commission.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, partnership is probably the absolute right word. And that's what we realized in our first discussions that we're having. Yeah, it's a real partnership in terms of like, what's the topic that we're focusing on? How can we shape how can we find the sweet spot of reducing the budget and therefore obviously the way how we produce a certain show, but still
keeping a quality so that it has still a great quality to be able to travel worldwide, also not only digitally, but also to linear channels. And then, the potential upside of getting a share of all revenues being generated with that project obviously brings the producer into the position that he and us, we have the same goal of having the greatest show possible for that budget, because all of us make more money with a great show later on than with a not so great show. So it is actually a real partnership in the end.
A really fascinating approach, because I think there must be so many producers in the UK, all around the world, that have so many great projects that they've always wanted to make, and perhaps just not being able to get that away for whatever reason. They get to the last hurdle, and then the commissioner leaves, and then the project all falls apart. And they may still have that access, or they may still be able to make that project. So I guess it's a real opportunity for producers to test, right? To test and learn how their projects they've got not only on the shelf but wanting to get made now, to test how that can work from a YouTube and revenue share model with you guys.
To be totally honest, I mean, we are not Discovery. We are not BBC or any of these, companies and parties and institutions that are able to put these big budgets into a project. So whenever somebody has discussed something with the BBC and then BBC drops out, so we can come in as a replacement for the BBC, obviously. So that's what I mean by we need to sit together to find the right project, which is the combination of producible in a cost-efficient way and the potential for the channels and for the international market. But there are plenty of these projects, and that's what I realized, plenty of production companies who are able to think flexible about what's possible and what's not. And what we also realize is that, and that's what you were just saying, and that's absolutely correct, the potential access for a producer to all these data that we have, and we absolutely share this with our production partners, obviously, is very interesting, because they learn straight away how their production works, when the audience drops out and why, and there's amazing data and amazing learnings that we can generate through this.
And now it's that time in the show when Gerrit gets to nominate his story of the week, the TV industry news that's caught his eye in the past 7 days. What's your story of the week, Gerrit?
Well, I came across this news about Amagi collecting $100 million, I think it was probably dollars, for their further growth. Amagi is one of these companies who are the technical partners whenever you as a content owner want to create a fast channel for Quintus or for all these OTT platforms that are out there. And they just raised this huge amount of money. And, for me, as someone sitting in the middle between the legacy, linear world and the new disrupted digital world, it shows just how big this potential for, OTT, digital, but professional content in the digital world, fast channels, all this together, how big the potential is. And, for me, it feels like we are right in the middle of this and right in the right space.
Well, it's certainly exciting times, and as evidenced with all of these software as a service companies who are obviously doing very, very well. So it's a real boom time for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, especially for former small companies that, in the old straight linear world, for a small company to really play the big game with the big companies being able to invest millions into content and their structures was always difficult. And now it's still difficult, obviously, but in this disrupted world, there are so many options and windows and opportunities that you can step into as a smaller, maybe a little bit more flexible company. And suddenly
this small opportunity grows, or you grow with the market. It is indeed very, very, very amazing, this current time and space.
And now it's that time for your hero of the week, Gerrit. Who are you nominating as your hero of the week?
Well, my hero of the week is probably, as in every other week, it's Jürgen Klopp.
Yes.
In this time I just read this little news about him sending a letter to a supporter of Liverpool who had cancer, and he wrote a personal letter, like a very emotional one, to this guy being really, really sick of cancer. And it just looks like this guy, Jürgen Klopp, he always finds the right words. And then again, he was the coach of my team, Borussia Dortmund. Unfortunately, he left to Liverpool. But you guys on the island, you have him now for a couple of years.
Well,
so happy you.
Listen, I'm a Leeds fan, Gerrit, so I have I have no loyalty. Yes, I have no loyalty to Jürgen Klopp. But you're right. He's not only is the world's most famous German, but he's also the guy that. It's, be more like Jürgen Klopp, isn't it? Be more Jürgen, yeah. I think is maybe the hashtag we should get going there. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I always said back then when he was still at Mainz, actually, I always said I want to be an intern under his coaching era. But unfortunately, until now, so Jürgen, if you hear this and you want an intern, just let me know, right?
All right. Okay. Well, maybe Jürgen will come on and one day and we can ask him. Yeah. and who or what are you telling to get in the bin, Gerrit?
Well, in the bin, I just watched on Sunday the third of three. They call it triels here in Germany. So the big election is coming up.
Right.
For the new government here in Germany. And, since I think 2 or 3 elections, they also do these TV debates where the chancellor candidates argue against each other. And this time we have 3 of them. And at the end of these discussions and debates, there's this 1 minute where each of the candidates can actually present for 1 minute, just without interruption, without someone saying anything, whatever they want to say. And I think this comes from the Anglo-Saxon world, but the difference is in this Anglo-Saxon world there are people who know how to play with the camera, whereas German politicians, I would say, we were just talking about internships. Yeah. So they are probably, I would say, more in that stage than in the professional world. So,
right.
So this is my getting to the bin, because it's not a pleasure to watch this, actually.
No. At the best of times, watching political debates is always a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And this is the replacement to Angela Merkel, right? She's been, certainly as Chancellor, she's been leading Germany for, I don't know how long, was it 20 years?
16 years.
16 years. So it's going to be unusual for the rest of the world looking in to have a new face at the helm of Germany.
Especially with the 3 candidates. I mean, they are probably competent. They are good in what they do. Who am I to do any criticism? But in terms of charisma, I think they're, from 82 million people living in this country, this is the essence of what's coming out. Is sometimes a little bit surprising, but anyway, they will. I'm 100% convinced they will do a good job.
Yeah,
hopefully at least.
All right. Well, we hope so too, and maybe Jürgen Klopp can run one day. Then that might make all the difference. Gerrit, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast. Really enjoyed our discussion. Really fascinating as well to hear this new approach to funding and distributing factual content as a sort of a hybrid, linear and digital channel approach. Really fascinating. So wish you all the best with that, and we'll speak to you again very soon.
Thank you, Justin.
My next guest on this week's TellyCast is a familiar name in factual production and distribution. Unscripted commissioning editor and international media consultant, Hannah Demidowicz. How are you doing, Hannah? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thank you, Justin, and thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on this week's show. Then we're talking about future of factual production and distribution and trends and where it's all going. As I say, you're a familiar name in unscripted, but for those listeners who maybe don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do now?
Yeah, so at the moment, I run my own consultancy, Demidowicz Consulting, and I work with broadcasters, independent production companies, and distributors to provide both editorial and commercial support. So that can be anything from developing brand new factual ideas all the way through to working with a distributor to help fund ideas and get them made, and with lots of different partners from all around the world.
One of your first roles in TV was at Nat Geo, where you spent quite a lot of time there.
Yeah, so I spent about 8, nearly 9 years at National Geographic, and I actually started there as a scheduler. So I was scheduling first the Dutch channel, and then eventually the UK channel. And at that time, we had like a small acquisitions and commissioning budget for the UK channel only. As you probably remember, both sort of Discovery and Nat Geo, there's always this kind of cyclical thing happening where international had lots of money and then it became very localized. So I was lucky enough to be working for the UK channel when we were in that sort of local phase. And I had a really supportive boss there called Simon Borsman. And rather than just scheduling, he got me involved with the acquisitions and then eventually the commissioning. That's how I started my commissioning journey, really, was commissioning local content for the UK channel. With shows like Car SOS, which I believe is now in series 9, still one of the most successful series on National Geographic in the UK and Europe. And then a couple of years later, the international department of National Geographic got moved to London from Washington, DC, where it had been previously. And Hamish Mycura came in to run that department. So I then went from just working on UK only content into international content as well. That was a really great few years. And from there, I went on to commission for BBC Worldwide, as it was known then, for their newly rebranded factual channels. And then from then, I went to work for TCB Media Rights for Paul Heaney as their first ever commissioning editor. And that's when I sort of began my sort of hybrid journey in editorial and distribution.
Okay, so all the boxes tick there, Hannah. That's good. Which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on the show, is to talk about, where we're going in this, obviously, burgeoning market, and lots of different things that are affecting the demand for content and also genres. It's funny, we had Adam McDonald on the show a few months ago, and he was also in scheduling. Does experience in scheduling make you a better commissioner or make you a better executive? What does it give you in terms of experience, and how can you bring that to bear when it comes to understanding distribution and commissioning?
It's a good question, because often people can be a little bit suspicious of commissioners that haven't had, haven't come from a production background. But, in a kind of democratic world, it's good to have different views. And I think what being a scheduler and coming from that sort of programming background has given me is this sort of deep appreciation of audiences and why we make all these content and sell the content, and why all this happens is because of audiences, and they are who we are there to serve. So I think that scheduling gives you this sort of deep understanding of catering for different audiences and understanding them and getting to know them and know what they want, and sort of being able to speak their own language, which in some ways makes you slightly less precious when it, perhaps not in all cases, when it comes to curating and exec producing a film from the broadcaster side, because you're making it not for yourself, you're making it for somebody else, and you're understanding who that person is.
We were talking to Gerrit earlier on in the show, and he was saying, data now is so key to running a successful channel on YouTube. And I would imagine other AVODs would say the same things, and SVODs obviously would say the same thing. So actually, it's about data-driven decisions when it comes to commissioning.
Yeah, I guess data's making a comeback, isn't it? It's it's interesting. I guess it sort of wasn't that that much of an appreciated way to, or maybe not just a very cool way of like making decisions. But I guess in a world of data, that's what we live in now. Everything is sort of driven by algorithms, so it makes sense that data will begin more and more to drive commissioning decisions. But with the caveat that there's always going to be gut decisions, instincts, I don't think that commissioning is going to be run by AI anytime soon.
No, and that's it. I guess new ideas are never going to be data-driven, essentially, are there? It's only about, more of something that's working, and maybe you'll try a certain twist on something as opposed to coming up with that brainstorm, brilliant creative idea.
That's it.
You mentioned your time at TCB with Paul Heaney. And Paul, I was delighted to bump into Paul in Dubrovnik a couple of weeks ago on the show, and we chatted about his new business, Bossa Nova. Now, one of the things that I think that made a lot of people stand up and take notice was your appointment as commissioner.
Yeah.
So for having a relatively small distribution company, appointing an experienced commissioner really sort of stood out, I think, and made a lot of people take notice. Now, is distributor as commissioner, is that still the future?
I think it is in various forms. So yeah, I think that when Paul employed me as a commissioner, then yeah, that definitely caused a few waves. People found it quite surprising, but it really did make a statement. And it really was just a sort of amalgamation of where Paul is quite visionary when it comes to the distribution business. And he knew for a long time that, you can't just sort of sit still and expect people to come and bring you nice sort of third-party content, finished tape. That's not the way the business is going. So he knew to sort of fulfill that pipeline, you've really got to sort of make your own lunch, I think, as he described it. So fully funding content was part, not all of that, but fully funding content was part of that. But that came with another realization that when you commission content, you've actually got to watch cuts, read scripts, give notes. Paul himself would happily admit that that's not his thing. So I joined, he asked me to join and to help him with that. And that's where it began. And that was a really interesting experience for both of us, really, because I was sort of coming into a fully commercial business for the first time, even though my time at BBC Worldwide had kind of been a hybrid of that. And for Paul, I guess he hadn't worked with anyone editorial before. So we learned an incredible amount from each other, and it was a really brilliant time. And I think we tried, we tried that model, and it definitely had some successes and some things that I'm really proud about, but we were kind of pioneers on the frontier of doing things in a different way. So I think the legacy of that absolutely lives on, and people are doing it in all sorts of various forms. So maybe it's not sort of straight commissioning as we know it is the future of distribution, but it is types of that. It's just about being innovative and thinking differently and sort of not sort of being passive about it. I think that's probably the message.
Yeah. When you started, was it more difficult as a commissioner for a distribution business? Were there any barriers you faced that perhaps companies who with the same sort of setup don't face now?
I guess it's sort of getting producers to understand the model. So why would a producer want to bring us their ideas? So why wouldn't they just take them to a channel directly? I guess sort of finding the best ideas and the best producers to work with, because it's just not quite as straightforward. So I guess when you're commissioning for a channel, you've got a pot of money, you're working for a UK channel, you give them some money, they make the program, they know who's going to see it and what channel it's going to be on. If you're asking people to develop ideas with you, which then your sales team are going to go out and pre-buy, it's quite hard for the producer, I suppose, to sort of know what tone, and for me to sort of brief them, it's like I'm kind of giving them a brief which amalgamates everything we know about everybody's commissioning brief from all around the world put into one thing. So that's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge that you also have working for international networks as well, because I always found that actually quite a similar comparison. So you're sort of trying to figure out what Asia wants, what Australia wants, what Latin America wants, and then putting it all together and figuring out what is the one thing that's going to work for everybody. So that was definitely a challenge, but also the challenge of trying to explain this new model to them. But a lot of producers, from a positive point of view, loved coming in working with us, because they may not have necessarily had much luck sort of banging on the door of terrestrial commissioners in the UK. So the opportunity for us to sort of help them get their ideas off the ground, but doing it by sort of bringing in 4 or 5 global partners was really appealing and helped, I guess, quite a few indies look outside the UK and think differently about how to go about getting their programs funded.
That's the nub of it, really, isn't it? It's about, for a factual producer, there are only so many buyers in the UK. And if you don't get an immediate yes, then it's a case of, well, Do you put that project on the shelf and say, oh, we're going to come back to that in a few years' time? Or do you look for different models, different funding models? And it seems to me now that there are many more funding models that have been developed over the past 18 months, 2 years, maybe. We've seen huge changes in funding models, but also in content genres. And that's obviously due to new buyers and new digital players coming to the market as well. Are there any particular trends that you're seeing now in terms of demand from existing and the newer buyers in factual?
Well, I've got quite, I guess, an interesting perspective because in the consultancy I do for production companies, I'm talking quite a lot to UK commissioners. And then for some of my other work, I'm talking a lot to international commissioners. So I kind of got this overarching view and lots of different briefs. And I would say, and of course, this is more in terms of like documentary and specialist factual, which is the sort of areas that I've always tended to work in. But the biggest demand really is for sort of premium box set series. And one of the biggest topics always on request from everybody is true crime. And it's been that way for a while. It's quite amazing really how often I sit in on briefings and we are asked for that, or we're told that's one of the biggest needs, not just in the UK but internationally.
It's not going away, is it? That demand for true crime is extraordinary.
No. There's this kind of talk about like the bubble, being burst soon, the true crime bubble bursting, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, actually. I wouldn't even say we're at the peak yet, quite honestly. So that big trend. But also, I suppose, what is not good about it is that in terms of like the ambition for it, that's definitely changed as well. So, people aren't looking for sort of 20-part closed episode series. They're looking for these incredibly beautifully well told stories with something new to say, someone new speaking for the first time, with a really sort of detailed look and really strong on the sort of filmic storytelling. So that's definitely a change. I mean, that's what I've seen as again in like the last 10 years, is this kind of move in factual all the way from, and I guess when I was commissioning it Nat Geo in the early days, there was a lot of guys with beards doing tough jobs on ice roads. So there's basically less beards these days and more. There's that change from sort of like long running series all the way through now to sort of limited premium box sets and feature docs. That is like a huge change that I've noticed.
It's obviously a huge generalization. Is factual going upstream, if you like? Is the average factual project becoming more premium?
I feel like it is, because there's so much competition for it, particularly among the streamers who have got money to spend. So I would say that in the sort of premium doc space, it's really competitive because so many people want it. So if you have got a great story with great access and something new to say, then, not to say it's never that easy, but there's never been more homes for that than there have in the last few years.
Again, we were chatting with Gerrit earlier on, and he was talking about Quintus's revenue and data share model for producers. Data is something, obviously, that, as you say, that you're really familiar with and comfortable with. Producers, by my assumption, is that would be less so. And at the moment, a producer pitches a project, gets it commissioned, and out it goes. The hope is that a broadcaster or the commissioning party do a half good job of launching it or PRing it. Sometimes they don't. If it's not one of the chosen few by the network that's given, the AAA treatment, then, there's lots of factual content that can go by the wayside and, gets commissioned. That's fine. It makes a certain amount of money for producers, but then it sort of disappears, if you like. Thinking about now and the new models out there and the data that is available that AVOD services are giving to producers, how important do you think it is and will be going forward for producers to look beyond the traditional linear commissioning model and start to manage their content more proactively, as if it's something that's really theirs, and which it is, it's their own IP, as they can get it funded in partnership with companies that are willing to revenue share, rather than just sort of selling it, getting the markup and then forgetting it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it would take quite a long time to sort of wean producers off that kind of need for a linear or a familiar broadcast. I think there will always be those who are more entrepreneurial and who will go out first into those sort of AVOD markets and, make their mark. But I think for some people, it's just kind of hard to, I guess, to sort of see the future of where AVOD is going. So, and feeling quite protective of your ideas and of your IP, you kind of want them to go somewhere where they're going to be seen. So I think it's really quickly taking off, and I think it's like incredibly fast moving, and it's probably been massively accelerated by the pandemic, the AVOD world. But I think it's probably going to be a year or so until we see some familiar names starting to pop up in terms of and once that happens, then everybody else will join. But I think it's going to be a slightly slower process for people to figure out exactly what the opportunities are and what it actually means for them as well.
I suppose, as you say, there are going to be a few more entrepreneurial, willing to test and learn, right? And as AVOD is becoming more mature and becoming more competitive, then they're starting to commission more and more original productions. Do you see, say, 5 years hence, do you think players in AVOD will become more valuable to producers than, for example, getting a Quest or Discovery Plus commission? And I'm talking about mid-level, sort of average budget type of project. I mean, do you see them becoming real competition for the best content?
I think particularly for youth, like younger, skewing content as well, because I actually think it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that the AVOD and like fast channels and stuff, they tend to skew younger, and it's almost like linear TV is having a comeback, but in a different form and found by different people, younger kids who don't want to, haven't got the money to sign up for all these expensive SVODs. And conversely, like the average age of Netflix is getting older, I think. I think I read somewhere that's what's happening. So actually, for producers that want to produce sort of younger skewing content, then actually those AVODs, they will become more important as a place, as a destination to get those ideas away, because that's a gap that they are filling, is that sort of like Gen Z aren't really watching much linear TV, but what they will do is go to a sort of AVOD channel and watch the Dog the Bounty Hunter channel back to back all day. So if you've got those eyeballs there, you're obviously going to want to sort of retain them and keep them, provide them reasons to stay and come back and watch their original content. And then perhaps as they get older, get them to sort of subscribe into the connected SVOD provider, which is probably part of the whole package, isn't it? So so I think there's probably definitely opportunities there.
So Hannah, I'm going to ask you, with all your experience in Factual, if you were a new Factual producer setting up a production business right now, how would you approach building that business? What sort of content would you make right from scratch? Let's say, okay, I'm going to build my first slate. What kind of content would you make, and who would be your first commissioners to target, and how would you approach distribution?
That is a really great question. Based on what I know at the moment and the future going forward, I think I would probably have like a 2-tiered slate. I would have top end, like premium docs in like contemporary history, and then I would have formats going on at the same time in like, this is not my world at all, but this is all made up. So I would have with like great reality, like the new reality, because the streamers all seem to want reality now. So like Too Hot to Handle on Netflix, the fact that they're taking The Circle on. So I would come up with some really great, the new evolution of reality on one hand, great formats that I could also then sell around the world, but topped off by some really classy, ambitious premium docs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that sounds that's easy done. Right.
Yeah. Easy. Yeah. No problem. No problem.
Some good tips for anybody there setting up their own production company. There seems to be enough being set up every week. So
I have to say, actually, it's very eye-opening because during my consultancy, I'm working for a few indies, and having not really been on that side before, the effort and passion that they put in to development is incredible. So my hat's off to them for people that set up and run their own indie, because it is like incredibly hard work and a complete emotional roller coaster of ups and downs. It's addictive, and I can see why people do it, because the highs are really highs, but the lows are quiet. The lows can be low. So I'm not sure it's something I would be wanting to do anytime soon.
Yeah, that development hell
Yeah.
process is really not to be recommended, I would imagine. But that's interesting because all your career, you've, as we said, you started as a scheduler, you've been commissioner at Nat Geo, you've spent time at BBC Worldwide and obviously at TCB. But actually, you, in terms of getting a sense of behind the scenes at a factual production company, you said obviously there's a lot of passion there, and we've seen an enormous willingness to get the job done over the pandemic in terms of, keeping production rolling. And what's been your biggest takeaway then, seeing behind the production curtain? Could you ever see yourself running your own indie?
I mean, like perhaps. I mean, never say never, of course. I just think I need to not have like very small children, because of the time and energy that it takes and what you have to put in of yourself to do that. So my biggest takeaway is that commissioners can be quite badly behaved, and if I was ever going to go back to commissioning, I would have learned many things to make me a much better commissioner in terms of primarily answering emails.
In any job or any profession, I guess, is, you're trying to work with others and not getting any feedback and not getting responses, for whether that's sending your CV into a job or your passion project through to a commissioner. But is that the worst thing that, in terms of communication, do you think that that commissioners are guilty of?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's really interesting seeing it on the side, and obviously I'm able to give the indies I work with the perspective as well of like how there's, as a commissioner, you've got 20 million different things going on at once. You're juggling plates. Like also in the UK, you're doing development and you're doing production. Helping to give indies that perspective is also useful. I've really felt that, send something that you've worked really hard on and it just disappears into the ether for a long amount of time. Yeah, it can be quite soul destroying. So I've definitely got such a better appreciation for the work that production companies do.
Obviously, you're a consultant and you don't want to be giving any of your secrets and tips away for free. But what would be your overriding piece of advice then to a factual producer now who's working within the market, knowing what you know? What would be your biggest single piece of advice for a factual producer now in terms of getting their content commissioned or acquired?
Yeah, I would say like there's so much going on in the industry and it's so fast moving at the moment that it's quite easy to get sort of waylaid by different like AVOD streamers, different things launching, different commissioners, different like trends. But I would say probably just like find your niche and your brand and what you're good at, and then hone in on 3 or 4 networks, streamers that seem to fit that, and then just be very focused on that, because I think sometimes there's this danger of like spreading yourself like too thin and trying to sort of cover everyone and do everything, be everything to everybody, but that can kind of be slightly counterproductive. So I would say just being very focused is the way forward, and having a bit of a brand.
So don't try and second guess what a network might be looking for based upon their other shows. Just, actually focus on what you're going to be really passionate and make really well. And then, even if there are only 2 buyers out there you think are right, then that's the better approach rather than being a bit more scattergun and trying to,
And why should you be telling these stories? Like, what's your background? What's your reputation? Like, I just think that counts for a lot, because there's a lot of, there's a lot of opportunities out there. So there's a lot of producers, there's a lot of ideas. So how do you make your ideas stand out? Well, I think making them feel that fact, like you said earlier, that they've got passion behind them is really important, because you only want to hear pitches from people that feel passionate about them rather than, a list of 20 ideas that are kind of being thrown together quickly.
And you mentioned brand as well, build a brand. I mean, how would you recommend a producer builds their brand?
Well, I guess that's about building. Okay, you've got to have some commissions first, I suppose, haven't you? So you've got to sort of decide. I think you just have to decide what you will do and what you won't do and what makes sense. So, again, so one of the indies that I'm working for is Candle Productions up in Leeds. That's run by Anna Hall, who's this fantastic director, and she's a creative director of the company. And Candle is basically like stories told with care, because that's what they do. They've always made very sort of sensitive documentaries. So that kind of any approach that they, any subject that they cover, the approach would always be sort of sensitive and done with care. And I think that kind of says a lot about who they are and what the films that they want to make. So I guess it's about a commissioner knowing what your approach is going to be and the sort of company that you are based on your credentials.
Right. So it's about having a mission, isn't it, actually? It's about having a mission, having a vision and staying true to it. And then everything that comes out of that in terms of different types of projects, as long as it's got that sense of your own vision in it, then that's the brand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And now it's time in the show where Hannah gets to nominate her story of the week, the TV industry news story that's caught her eye over the past 7 days. Hannah, what's your story of the week?
So my story of the week is that CO2 emissions were halved during the pandemic on TV productions. So I thought that was really interesting, and also a sort of thought that I think is probably going to be with everybody moving forward, as as we're sort of getting back to the new normal in inverted commas. So what is TV production going to look like? And how, the sort of lessons that we've learned in terms of being able to cope and doing things remotely, how is that going to sustain into this bigger question of how we are a, sustainable, industry?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's something that we've touched on before on the show. And actually, one of the interesting things I came across was, if you're creating a travel show or a natural history show, for example, and people haven't been able to fly for so long, the positive effect that might have on the local production industry in many of these far-flung places like Guinea or Borneo or wherever it might be, actually, that's really starting to have a positive impact across the world as well, rather than just putting a big crew and lots of boxes on the plane and flying them halfway around the planet. I mean, that's a lot, right? That's surely something that we've got to take on board and take forward, and just, don't go back to the old ways.
Exactly. Because, not only is it sort of a wake-up call, like you say, about being able to use local crews and sort of empowering areas where they might not have as much sort of production experience, and sort of trying to, be in a position to collaborate, work together, give people skills. It's also a question of thinking about how we want to be as an industry, and actually, like, we are probably quite a polluting industry in terms of like all the air travel. So just from a logistical, practical point of view, I think it's taught us a big lesson in, yes, it can be done. And again, a couple of years ago, the thought of using local crews on shows would always have been slightly sort of met with concern, worry, a bit of suspicion. So I think that has been completely revolutionised, and I think that's a really good thing. But of course, it has to be tailored with this need that we have to want to see other places around the world. I think travel shows are going to come back in a big way once things really start to open up, because there's that kind of audience, especially in the UK, there's that sort of audience desire to see the world again. So it's how we balance what we've learned, so we don't just sort of rewind back to where we were 2 years ago.
And now it's time for your hero of the week. Hannah, who are you nominating for your hero of the week?
This week, I'm going to nominate Chris Whitty for calling out Nicki Minaj on her ridiculous COVID-19 vaccination tweet about her cousin's friend becoming impotent just before his wedding. And Chris Whitty, I think, basically just was shutting that down in the way only he can. But it turns out, I think that Nicki Minaj was actually watching that press conference, because she then tweeted back quite quickly, didn't she, that she was like, oh no, it's a diss. So yeah, hero of the week, definitely Chris Whitty, for calling out silly rumours.
We could probably nominate him for Hero of the Year, actually, because he's been one of the only sane voices that we could rely on through the worst of the pandemic. And who or what's going in your bin?
Well, this is probably a bit controversial, but in that same report, it's the Albert kind of annual review that said about the CO2 levels. It also does this really fascinating thing where it has a subtitle report where it takes data from subtitles that were aired on BBC ITV, Channel 4, 5, Sky and UK TV. And it found that the word dog was used 200% more than the phrase climate change. So I'm actually going to put dogs in the bin, because I actually don't really like dogs. I didn't realise this is such a controversial opinion until I worked at TCB, actually.
You don't like dogs?
No, and there's so many of them now, especially since lockdown. They're everywhere. And yeah, I don't like them. I thought it was all right not to like dogs until I mentioned it at TCB, and it caused such horror there because they were all massive dog lovers. So now I'm normally quite quiet about my dislike for dogs. Now I've totally outed myself on your podcast as a non-dog lover.
Oh, this is very controversial. I mean,
know.
Are you a cat person then, or a hamster person? I mean, what you must have some sort of pet.
I do like cats. Yeah,
you like
I
cats.
do like cats, but yeah, just not keen on dogs and their overly personal, nature.
Oh dear. Well, my
and I know because you said earlier that you had your dog with you.
My dog Ozzy is in the office with me today. He's looking
growling
at me.
now.
Yeah, he's
shaking his head.
He's not very happy, Hannah. But there we are. Well, that's very controversial dogs going in the bin there. Well, there we are. We'll have to have something to balance the equilibrium maybe next week. We'll see. But Hannah, thanks for joining me. It's been brilliant to chat with you. Will you be going to any of the markets coming up? Will we see you out and about at any of the unscripted markets?
Well, I'm not going to MIPCOM.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope to go to Real Screen early next year, and I'll certainly be hanging out at Science Congress virtually.
Hannah, thank you again. Well, we'll definitely see you in Austin, Texas, which is going to be fun.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, that's about it for another week's show. As always, thanks a lot for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. And a quick reminder to sign up for our free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week you may have missed and exclusive insight and opinion. And it's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe